no one in a small village of only 200 was aware that there were 16 kids behind the closed doors of that home, and that just kind of boggles your mind.
The mysteries inside the Siders family house of horrors deepen, but we're getting answers.
There's so many rumors, you know what I mean, of what's real, what's not, what the cops saw, if they're sensationalizing it, and I really don't think they are based off of what I've seen.
The suspected secrets the family wanted hidden away are now being unearthed in a series of newly unveiled court docs. Childhood truancy, a disappearing act, and questions surrounding the family's education level, all while they continue to maintain their innocence. This is Scandal, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Sierra Gillespe. The Cyrus family's so-called House of Horror continues to shock and disturb the public from coast to coast. And with the curiosity comes questions, many without answers, but some are hidden in plain sight. We're following the paper trail leading to the suspected secrets the Siders didn't want the world to know. Were their children pulled out of public school to be homeschooled? What's the actual status of their bank account? And above all, why were their children allegedly found in deplorable conditions? What's their relationship with their children even like? We're breaking it all down and hearing from those closest to the case about what's ahead. We begin with the family itself. It's made up of 4 adults: 73-year-old Gary Siders Sr., his wife, 67-year-old Christina Siders, who goes by the name Lynn, their son, 36-year-old Gary Siders Jr., and his wife, 33-year-old Elizabeth Siders. On June 30th, a search warrant was executed on their home in Vinton County, Ohio. And that's when investigators found 16 Siders children ranging in ages from 1 to 18. The state attorney general reported the kids were housed in a 12 by 12 room, emaciated, and allegedly treated worse than livestock. They've all since been charged and face 16 counts each of endangering children. And we're going to break down those charges and bonds, the family's relationship, all of that. But first, a look at rural Vinton County. Here's former Ohio Judge Fanon Rucker.
We have 88 counties in the state of Ohio. Just one state, 88 counties. In fact, Vinton is, I think I read, it's got about 12,000 people, the least populous county out of all 88 in the state of Ohio. It's a largely rural area. As I drive sometimes to Virginia, my alma mater is there. I go through parts of West Virginia. I go through parts of rural Ohio. And it's kind of amazing to me to see how spaced out people are and how disconnected from the rest of the world quite a few people, in fact, I would say the majority of people live versus those who live in urban areas.
This is video straight from Vinton County, Ohio, taken by Law&Crime's very own Anjanette Levy. And we're going to sit down with Anjanette later on in this episode to hear her perspective on the condition of the home and the city. But according to prosecutors, the conditions were absolutely deplorable.
I've been doing these types of cases for a long time. I spent a big portion of my career dedicated to prosecuting these types of cases. And I can tell you this is pure evil. What we saw down here today is pure evil. And I have to commend the deputies from the Vinton County Sheriff's Office and our agents from Ohio BCI and I who went into really kind of one of the worst environments that I've seen in my career, and were there for those children in their time of need.
It's statements like these, the reports of feral children and quote-unquote evil parents, that have made the Siders family home a new stop in the world of dark tourism. Teresa Kernell drove over 2 hours to get a look at the home.
Just curious about this whole situation, because how could a whole family live like that and no one know it? I wanted to see like how close were neighbors. Usually in small towns, neighbors are friendly with each other, you know, so how would you not know what's going on? And if she was pregnant every year, it looks like somebody would have said, where's all your kids? You know, like, I just don't understand. People usually, you know, especially in a small town, you get excited about when someone's pregnant and you're thinking, oh, did you have your baby? You know, but then you never see it. Mm-hmm. And that's happening every year and you never see any children. That's just odd.
Here's what's odd. Somebody did say something. In fact, the courts were even involved. Take a look at this court doc dated October 19th, 2021. Now, this is out of Gallia County, about an hour south of Vinton County, and it's a complaint against parent or guardian for a child being truant. Now, we've blocked out the child's name for their privacy, but here's what the doc reads in part quote. The child has been absent from school without legitimate excuse for the entire 2021-2022 academic year to present, an amount in excess of 72 hours for the school year, and as such is thereby a habitual truant. Prior to the filing of this complaint, the undersigned notified said parent or guardian that the said child is not attending school or class in violation of law and required her to cause the said child to attend such school or class forthwith, and the undersigned warned said parent or guardian in writing of the final consequences of truancy if persisted in or of failure to attend such school or class. There's another almost identical court doc for another one of the Siders kids, too, which was also reported as truant. In all, Gary Jr. and Elizabeth Siders faced 6 truancy complaints. At the time these docs were filed back in fall of 2021, the oldest would have been around 13 years old. Here's former Franklin County prosecutor Ron O'Brien, who specialized in truancy.
I started actually a truancy program, even though you would think a district attorney would not focus on truancy, but I was finding that the people who were 15, 16, and 17, we were binding over for trial as an adult, that their first contact was a truancy charge. Whether it was a robbery, a burglary, or a homicide, their first contact with the court was truancy. And my thought process was, if we can get them into school and get them graduated, that will help both with employment. And I believed correctly that it would prevent them from starting down that road of crime. So you'd have to register in the school district and be assigned to a specific school and then attend. And if they are at least excessively late, tardy, or truant, then there's a truancy officer that is to attempt to contact the parents. And apparently, in trying to contact them, they weren't able to do so, and that's why they filed the complaint.
According to Ron, parents whose children are determined to be habitually truant in the state of Ohio can face fines or even child neglect charges. But by January 2022, just 3 months after those truancy docs were filed, Elizabeth Siders went missing. This court doc shows the court essentially gave up looking for her and seemingly dropped the truancy investigation. It was filed on January 7th, 2022. It reads, the court finds that Elizabeth Siders is unable to be served and the whereabouts of Elizabeth Siders are unknown to the court. Therefore, it is hereby the order of the court that the above matter be terminated until the availability of Elizabeth Siders.
Usually, the truancy cases we've had over the years are children that are excessively truant, and there's a statutory definition on different levels of absences, but it's somewhat rare to have children not at all going to school, and um, that's what happened here. And when they learned about it, apparently they filed a complaint in the Gallia County Court, but like any other court document, you have to get service, and they couldn't get service, is what I understand was the problem, number one. And number two, when they did try and find them, they were unable to find them either at different locations. And yesterday, I was given a list of places that the folks had lived at, and they did move around, uh, and those were birth records for the various children. Some were born in Gallia County, some were born in other parts of Ohio, and they just didn't find a good address for them. And frankly, I don't know how much time and effort they spent in trying to locate them. Obviously,
We have since learned from prosecutors that the Siders family moved around a lot to multiple different counties in Ohio, even reportedly Wisconsin at one point, and only showed up in Vinton County about 4 years ago. And there are a few things here to start. Is it possible the Siders family stayed on the move to evade the government?
I think that it happens probably a bit more than we believe, especially when you go from someplace where there is the ability and the finances to monitor and see what's going on to places where, again, rural areas where people are able to live under the radar. So it does happen, and we do see that from time to time. I don't think it's something that everybody does all the time, but there certainly are instances where people move around in order to avoid the watchful eye of government agencies that may have knocked on their door at some point.
And there's also questions about whether the children were formally taken out of school and then enrolled in homeschooling. But according to Ron, there would be protocol for all of that too.
Of course, there are provisions for homeschooling, but you have to go through a registration process and have it approved by the school district and others that you're going to homeschool the children, and that wasn't done either. Now, mom and dad may claim that they were homeschooling, but you can't just say under Ohio law, I'm homeschooling them. I didn't contact the school district and I didn't register the necessary requirements. So at least it was completely AWOL from the system, either through homeschooling or otherwise.
So the Siders family quietly disappeared from Gallia County about 4 years ago, and it seems anyone of authority stopped looking for them. That is until a warrant was served on their property on June 30th. And there's been some confusion here. Some reports initially said the warrant was related to Gary Jr.'s public indecency charge, and Gary does face that allegation for reported 4 incidents between May 23rd and May 31st, but that's not what the search warrant was related to. And we could talk about that more and dive into it deeper, but there's still a major question mark here about why that warrant was served in the first place.
Now I've been practicing for 30 years. I have worked for the federal courts, watching and reviewing FBI affidavits for federal magistrates to sign off on. I've been a prosecutor for several municipalities, obviously as a judge for 13 years. I saw a lot of cases and investigations, and the result of great police work, like I think we can argue here, absolutely is the case. And what's surprising to me, and surprising to a lot of people that I talk to, is how the truth is many people are not the original targets of an investigation, but by virtue of other conduct that they're engaged in or people that they're communicating with who may be under investigation, they then get caught up in the net or their crimes get exposed. And it's very possible that what they were looking for here, again, unrelated to the children, is absolutely what led them to discover the conditions and the health conditions of these children who they didn't even know apparently were there before that search warrant was actually executed.
But we do know a search warrant was served and all 4 adults were formally charged. And that leads to the next set of court docs that we have, the bond modification requests. Now, all 4 defendants appeared in court in early June and their bond was all the same.
This time, the state would be requesting a $300,000 cash surety bond for each defendant under the court standard terms and conditions, including special conditions that they have no contact with each other as co-defendants, and they have no contact with the victims, and if they are able somehow to post bond, that GPS monitoring at their expense.
Do you have anything to say as to any of that? All right, I will grant the state's request then. It will be a $300,000 cash or surety bond.
On July 7th, the bond modification request was made in the case of Gary Sr. It reads in part, the defendant in this matter is a 73-year-old man who appears to have some significant health issues, who has very limited mobility, who exhibits concerns for both his mental health and his competency to stand trial, and has no means to post any sort of bond. And I want to note any is underlined, bolded, and italicized. He has no means to post any bond, according to his defense. So a couple of things here. Questions about Gary Sr.'s competency, the lack of funds to meet bond, and of course his age and mobility issues. Now, because of HIPAA laws, we don't know exactly what sort of condition or diagnosis Gary Sr. has, but we do know he took a fall being transported from jail. And we know about all of this because his bond was in fact modified on July 8th. This is straight from the court docs. They read, the defendant was being held on a $300,000 cash or surety bond, but was transported to Blessedness Hospital in Athens, Ohio on July 7, 2026, at which time it was recommended that he be transferred to a larger hospital for more specialized care. It is therefore ordered that the defendant's bond is modified from a cash or surety bond to a $300,000 reconnaissance bond with GPS paid for at the state's expense in the event he is released from the hospital. And I read that correctly. If he's released from the hospital. Again, we don't know his condition, but it seems that whatever sort of treatment he could require may be detrimental for the county. This is Prosecutor William Archer from a press conference on July 9th.
Gary Siders Sr., the older Gary Siders, was provided with a bond today, an OR bond. Let me explain the circumstances around that. First, let me stress, the community is not at risk because of this bond. Yesterday, as you all know, the cases were scheduled for preliminary hearing. During the transport, Mr. Siders fell and had a medical issue that required treatment and assessment. Oblennis Hospital was where he was taken, and it was determined at that point upon some tests that Oblennis did that Mr. Siders Sr. has a serious medical condition that requires specialized care in a hospital outside of this area. Practically, and I don't know if you folks know this or not, but when defendants are housed in county jails, it is the county's responsibility to pay for the medical care. Prisons are for defendants who have been convicted. Then the state pays for it, but he's still an innocent man that has not been convicted yet. So the county was going to be on the hook for his medical care. And again, based on the information that we were provided, his medical care could potentially bankrupt Vinton County. We were not going to put that burden also on our local taxpayers.
Archer talked about Gary Sr.'s competency, too, which has been a question. On July 9th, the competency exam was officially ordered. The header reads, order directing an evaluation to determine whether the defendant is not guilty by reason of insanity and whether the defendant is competent to stand trial. I won't go through the entire document because, honestly, there's a lot to it, but here are the major takeaways for you. First, a certified forensic center designated by the Department of Mental Health has about 30 days to conduct the competency exam. Then the examiner must give their opinion about whether Gary Sr. is competent and explain why. What led them to that belief? What are the facts to prove it? What is the evidence? Now, if Gary Sr. is deemed incompetent, the examiner must also state whether they believe Gary Sr. could ever be competent. And if so, when? What sort of timetable would that look like? So expect movement over the next few weeks in the way of Gary Sr.'s competency exam results. In the meantime, his daughter-in-law, Elizabeth, has also requested a bond modification. This request, filed by Elizabeth's attorney Tommy Stolley, notes her Eighth Amendment right as an American that excessive bail shall not be required. In this case, the defendant is a 33-year-old mother with no known criminal history. Given the defendant's lack of criminal history, she has never been charged with failure to appear before a court for a criminal proceeding. There has been no indication that the defendant has been anything but cooperative with law enforcement since the initiation of this case. As such, the defendant has indicated that will provide the court every assurance necessary that she will appear to all future hearings and will comply with the terms set forth by this court.
Here, what we know is there were 16 children who were in deplorable conditions in a home where the father, mother, and grandparents were living, and they were subjected to, according to the prosecutor, severe, pervasive, intergenerational abuse and neglect. What bond is appropriate for individuals who are living in poverty circumstances? $300,000 was the bond that was given to each one of them, saying that if you're going to be released while this case is pending, you got to post $300,000 each. The reality is, what are their financial circumstances? Could that $300,000 be $1 million? Or could that $300,000 serve its same cause with the $5,000 bond because they don't have the resources to bond themselves out? And even if they do, what chances, with no prior criminal history, with few contacts in other places, what is the likelihood that they're not going to come back? I mean, that really is the issue, not the allegations of how horrible of a condition they allowed their children to exist in, but what is the current risk of harm to themselves, to the children who we know have been removed, and to others, to the community. Those are factors that the court must take into consideration, or should take into consideration, when deciding what an appropriate bail is, if a person is going to be released, or what other conditions. So, I understand she doesn't have a prior record. She's 33 years old, started having kids at 15. The kids have all been removed. They don't have financial resources. Personally, based on 30 years of experience in the courts and criminal prosecutions and judicial activities, I would be very surprised if the court does not lower that bail to something less than $100,000. I can't say OR as the grandfather was, but he had health problems and they had to get him out of there because financially the county wasn't going to be able to sustain his medical treatment, so they let him out on OR bond. I don't know that that's what she'll get, but I would be very surprised if her bond was not significantly reduced now that the danger to the children has been cessated, or has been diminished by the fact they've been removed and that they don't have contact with those children.
The filing notes Elizabeth maintains her innocence. The filing reads, quote, "The defendant understands that the charges alleged in the amended complaint are serious. However, the defendant has denied all allegations. The defendant has a vested interest in appearing for future hearings in an effort to clear her name." And that leads us to Elizabeth's attorney, Tommy Stolley, who spoke out on News Nation for the first time this week.
It is very clear that Elizabeth Siders cares about these kids. In the hours and hours that I sat there in the jail, she keeps directing the conversation back to, are the kids okay? She's been receiving care packages in the jail, Chris, and today she tried to give me some of the items from her care package to give to the kids.
According to Tommy, Elizabeth maintains her innocence and cares about her kids.
I was able to meet with my client, Elizabeth. I've met with her now 3 times. The person that I met does not come across as pure evil. The person that I met comes across as a mother who has been separated from her children, who is exhausted, and who misses her children, and is asking me constantly what she needs to do to see her children again, what she needs to do to ultimately be reunited with her children. That does not jive with the prosecutor's narrative. It doesn't jive with the Attorney General's narrative. And I think because of that language that was used so early on in this case, we are sitting here now having to defend that on television and in the media instead of in a court of law.
There's also a lot of questions about the condition in which Elizabeth and the kids were in, and whether Elizabeth herself could have been the 17th victim.
The notion that these kids were somehow confined to this 12 by 12 space is pure conjecture. There is no evidence to support that these kids were in any way restrained in this room. There's no evidence to suggest that these kids were not allowed to go outside of this home. This is a case, Chris, and it's a case that is far too often true here in Southeast Ohio. This is a case of poverty. This may be a case of isolation. It may be a case of parents getting in over their head when it comes to their children and their family. But this is a case of these people living together here.
The only people who really know what happened inside that house are the Siders family. But there has been some speculation that perhaps Elizabeth could have been a victim given her history. Now, as we've reported, Elizabeth was only 15 years old when she got married. She actually had to cross state lines into West Virginia to get married to Gary Jr., who was 18 at the time.
Now, as I understand it, she got married, her and her husband got married when he was 18 and she was 15. They got married in West Virginia, where in West Virginia, the law is, as long as the parent consents, there is no age under which a child can get married. Reasonable minds can disagree as to how comfortable of a feeling we have about that kind of setup.
We know that Elizabeth gave birth for the first time just a few short months after her teen marriage was official. So what does that have to say for her education level? Did she graduate? Did she go to college? According to her brother, both she and Gary Jr. have low IQs. This is a post from her brother. It reads in part, quote, This what I think. Slap on the wrist. You cannot be charged for ignorance. The horror stories is not true. Nothing is true. My sister and her husband really did do their best to their IQ. Allowance is the one to blame. Low IQ, getting that money. Similar. Just like me on my plus 500 app, I be chasing that money with a bit higher IQ. Everything is misunderstood. Their hygiene, low IQ. The man of the house is responsible at most. He's the leader. Leading follows. That's what I think. Elizabeth's brother has also floated the idea that perhaps she was indoctrinated into something. Now, into what, we're still not entirely sure. But does education or religion have anything to do with a case like this? And we're going to take a closer look into all of that during our interview with Ancientette. But first, another question we're all asking. Should someone have intervened before June 30th of this year? We saw that they tried and failed in Gallia County a couple of years ago with the truancy of it all, but was it on doctors and nurses at the hospital to raise any red flags? Between 2008 and now, Elizabeth Siders has given birth at least 17 times, including one time to conjoined twins who died shortly after birth. And according to Tommy Stolley, all the babies were born in the hospital. So is it possible medical staff started to recognize Elizabeth as a regular, having 16 babies year after year after year? Experts like Fanon say hospital staff did everything right.
However, once they started having children, that's completely legal. And the idea that a hospital will say, hey, you're having a lot of kids, there's something going on here, I don't know that I agree. Again, that's government intrusion into the private lives of individuals. And unless there was something about how she presented, perhaps she showed up with bruises and there was a question whether she was being abused by her husband, or the children were born and they were born with some type of drug addiction or something like that, which gave you into the idea of them conducting or being engaged in criminal activity. I don't know what would have raised the hospital's eyebrows that something weird or untoward was happening that required their intervention.
But 16 pregnancies, births, and hospital stays does beg a question. How did the Siders family pay for all of this, especially if they've since been deemed indigent?
Well, at least I think it's a legitimate question to ask, and I got to think they were on some kind of support, whether it's food stamps or otherwise, and so you have to register for that at Jobs and Family Services. So at least somewhere along the line, and maybe, and I think it's true in some of the smaller counties, people are less nosy, if you want to call that, about the neighbors, and intentionally say what's it's not my business. But here with 16 kids, and there were two others, as you know, that were born that died shortly after. They were conjoined twins. That somewhere having 18 kids over 18 years. Now there were multiple births and twins, but still that would cause somebody with that information, be it hospitals, OBGYNs, medical doctors that looked at a mom, prenatal, all those kind of factors fit into it.
Meanwhile, the fascination with Vinton County and the Siders family has not slowed down one bit.
I drove by because I was just kind of curious to see actually, because there's so many rumors, you know what I mean, of what's real, what's not, what the cops saw, if they're sensationalizing it, and I really don't think they are, based off of what I've seen. It's horrible, and a lot of people are saying it's a poverty thing, living poor. A lot of people live poor in this area. I don't have money like that, but I don't live like that, you know what I mean? Poverty and dirty are two different things. I mean, the cockroaches, the filth, you don't have to let your kids live like that. So I just kind of wanted to see if I could see from the road myself what it looked like. I mean, obviously you can't see anything from here, but just a lot of concern for them kids. I can't imagine 16 kids in that little house.
And it's all this. Visitors to the crime scene, national news coverage that led Gary Jr.'s defense to petition the court for a gag order, citing allegedly prejudicial statements made by the Attorney General and prosecutors so far. This is straight from the court docs. In this case, defendant seeks to invoke the court's duty to protect him from the inherently prejudicial publicity that is currently circulating through comments made by public officials linked to this case. Unfortunately, the Ohio Attorney General's office, the Vinton County Clerk of Courts, and the Vinton County Sheriff's Office have made statements that make it substantially likely that the defendant's right to a fair trial will be prejudiced. The order cites these specific soundbites.
Most of our livestock was kept in better conditions than the children. It looked like almost feral animals. It was terrible.
Per court docs, these statements have resulted in a substantial probability that the defendant's right to a fair trial will be prejudiced by publicity, and a gag order can prevent further damaging statements. And shockingly, a judge granted this request, writing, "The court finds, given the publicity thus far, that any statements made to media by the Ohio Attorney General's Office, the Vinton County Prosecutor's Office, Vinton County Clerk of Courts, and the Vinton County Sheriff's Office, and any other party related to the investigation of prosecution of the alleged crimes, including defense counsel, would create a reasonable likelihood of prejudicial pretrial publicity, which may impact the ability to impanel an impartial jury. The court finds the following least restrictive and reasonable constraints are necessary to avoid any potential prejudice, whether real or perceived, to protect the judicial process." All right, we walked you through the facts of the case as we know them at the time of this reporting, but I've still got a lot of questions, and I have truly the perfect guest to ask them to. It's Law&Crime's very own Anjanette Levy, the host of Crime Fix. And Anjanette, thank you. You've been coming on Scandal 2 weeks in a row. I just can't believe it.
I know. I'm back, so I must have done okay the last time. So
No, you did more than okay. Everyone was so into the interview. It's so great to talk to you. And honestly, the reason that I wanted to have you back on and talk about all of this is, again, you are the point person when it comes to this case. And now you've actually visited Vinton County recently over the weekend. Can you tell me about your experience?
yeah, I decided to go out there. Like if you can get on the ground and go scout around and talk to people, that's like the best way to get information. So it's funny because you look at the house and that's all you see on the news, of course. And you see this dilapidated, terrible condition that these children were living in. There's photos floating around online of the inside. It appears the prosecutor is going to be looking into that with the sheriff's office and possibly prosecuting people for trespassing and maybe obstruction. So people have been crossing the tape, which they shouldn't do. But I went out there and, I was driving into town and I thought it's a cute little town. I saw an Amish buggy there, an Amish couple driving with their horse-drawn buggy. And it doesn't appear to me that, this is the norm out there at all. I talked to a couple of people who came out to see the house, and they had driven, one person had driven from over an hour away. Another set of women, they were about 45 minutes of the way, they said, attending a festival, and they came, though, from 2 hours away. So people are incredibly curious. And what I think resonates so, why this case resonates so much with people is because everybody said, I just had to see it because I don't understand how this could happen, how 16 kids could be in a house and nobody would know that they were there. And it's like they were being hidden, as the Attorney General said. But then I talked to a neighbor, Sierra, who said a couple of years ago she had seen 2 or 3 little kids in the yard playing, running around. She said they looked skinny, but then when they saw her, they ran toward the house. And she felt like, wow, that's weird. Like, are they hiding? Like, what's going on? So it can happen, and it has happened, that people apparently didn't know children were living there. But people don't get it. They can't wrap their minds around this happening.
I mean, I think that's fair because when you hear the sound bites that we've played in your episodes on Crime Fix here on Scandal, where the Attorney General is saying things like feral children, livestock were treated better, I believe one of the sheriffs said, like all of the comparisons, it's almost too hard to believe. So I can understand why people want to see in real life. The conditions here are just kind of crazy. And I guess that leads into my next question here too, the gag order of it all. Because as you pointed out, there were people who literally traveled to this county from upwards of 2 hours away to see it in real life. People across the world are talking about it. We're getting hit after hit on our video. So what are your thoughts about the gag order?
Well, I'm going to tell you right now, I've never been a fan of gag orders, and I'm certainly not a fan of it in this case. This gag order is so broad. It's overly broad. It bars any public official from releasing information and discussing this case. It's so inappropriate. And the fact that Gary Siders Jr.'s attorney filed this gag order request and then a proposed order barring basically anybody from talking about it and releasing information outside of what happens in court, and then public pleadings like paperwork filed in court, barring anybody from talking about it, releasing information. I can't believe the judge just signed that on the same day it was filed. No input whatsoever from the prosecution side. And I think you're going to see some consequences from that. The Columbus Dispatch, the newspaper in Columbus, it's really more of a website now, they've gone to the Supreme Court of the state of Ohio now for a second time, and they're challenging this gag order. They're saying this is wrong, and the procedure wasn't followed. A hearing should have been held on this issue. And they're saying also that the judge is supposed to take the least restrictive route in issuing any type of gag order. And that's right. I mean, that's right. There was no input from the state side. As members of the media, we should be challenging this and pushing back against it, because these children, the allegation right now is that these children were hidden and nobody knew about them. And we have a lot of questions like public children's services. Where were they? Did they know about the kids? I've confirmed through people that Gallia County Public or Children's Services was on to them, and that's why they left Gallia County. You see the truancy charges, the truancy complaint filed against Elizabeth and Gary Jr. regarding 6 of their children never attending school during one school year. And so that backs up what I've been reporting about this. So you're going to keep a situation that needs some sunlight. They say sunlight's the best disinfectant. You're going to keep a situation that needs some sunlight in the dark. And guess what? Your client can still get a fair trial, even if people are allowed to talk about this case and information is able to be released. And that's the concern he cited. But there's a public right to know here as well.
I mean, there's so much interest in all of it, at the very least, number one. You and I, our job as reporters is to ask questions. And something that the defense has said, multiple different defense attorneys have said, okay, they're innocent until proven guilty. I believe this was cited in Elizabeth and Gary Sr.'s, motion for bond modification. They said they want to appear in front of a court. They want to clear their name. So if this really is a big misunderstanding, why do we have a gag order here? Why aren't you enlightening us about the background? But something you did mention, Anjanette, and kind of our episode here today is about all of the info we got in the many court docs. And you brought up the truancy. So can you explain to me what you found here? It was over in Gallia County when they lived back there?
Correct. And just so the viewers understand, this family is originally the Siders family, both Elizabeth, as when she was Elizabeth Russell, and the Siders, they are from Gallia County. That is a county that's, right next to Vinton County. It's actually right south of Vinton County. So it appears that in either 2020 or 2021, that the family moved from Gallia County up to Vinton County and started living there. We found some documents. The Dispatch got their hands on them first, and then I got them from Gallia County, because I kept hearing, kept being told, that Gallia County Children's Services was looking into them. They were onto them. Well, it appears that in October of 2021, the Gallia County School District, as they are required to do by Ohio law, went to juvenile court and they filed complaints telling Gary Jr. and Elizabeth, 6 of your children who are supposed to be in school have not attended school this entire school year. Now, that entire school year up to that point would have been over a month.
Yeah.
And the school district had warned them and said, look, your kids need to be in school. You're not sending your kids to school. And so they filed these 6 complaints, and it's for the 6 oldest children. The oldest at that time would have been 13. And they said, your children have not been in school this entire school year. They are habitually truant, and they could be considered or deemed unruly children. And that's just a legal term. Doesn't mean they're out being crazy and doing anything weird. So the courts were getting involved. The school district was doing what they were required to do. The children had missed 72 hours or more of school that year, and that triggers a process whereby they have to go to court and cite the parents for truancy. And there can be fines. There can be child neglect charges that come from that. But they couldn't find the parents to serve them with the paperwork. So then in January of 2022, 3 months later, the court kind of shut down the case because they can't find them. If you can't serve somebody with the paperwork and you can't find somebody, then you can't go through with a process in the courts.
Okay, we feature all of this in our episode too. We go through kind of the truancy paperwork from Gallia County and then the termination of it all, where they say, we literally don't know the whereabouts of Elizabeth Siders. So we're going to close this for now, whatever. And I mean, you touched on it briefly, but I just want to drill into it a little bit more. We believe that, according to some reports, that they left because of this truancy, like they were running from the law, quote unquote.
Well, I don't know if it's because of the truancy per se.
Okay.
But I have learned that Children's Services, was interested in the Siders. So they may very well have left before they could even, say the children were truant. Or it could have been Children's Services kind of peeking into this, and then they leave because the kids haven't shown up for school. But it appears around that time, 2020, 2021, somewhere in there, is when they moved to Vinton County. So that is when it appears they moved up there with the kids. And so if you are going to be possibly charged with child neglect because you haven't sent your kids to school, maybe you're like, oh my God, I'm getting out of here. I'm getting out of Dodge. We got to get out of here with these kids. And that may be what we end up learning when we get all of the information. We're kind of getting these nuggets and just piecing them together bit by bit. So that's what it appears to be at this time.
It's really hard, to your point, where we have to go through and get little pieces. And so we say, okay, we know this is a fact and this is a fact. The in-between, still speculation, still question marks, still working out to figure what happened. And I guess that leads into another one of my questions, the fact that we do know for a fact that Elizabeth married Gary Jr. She was only 15 years old. We've talked about this. She had to go across the state border into West Virginia, all of that. We've talked about how on our last episode together, her brother alleged she had been indoctrinated into something of sorts. So a lot of people are talking about, is there some sort of religion to this? Is there, lack of education? The brother called out her low IQ, and I'm quoting her brother saying that. But I'm wondering, if she's married at 15, what do we know about Elizabeth and her backstory?
The very little that we know is that she has 2 older brothers, and she's the youngest of the 3 children. She was growing up in Gallia County, living in a trailer park, it appears, and that's where she met Gary Jr. And she becomes pregnant somewhere around, the time she turns 15, it appears. She might have been 14 when she actually became pregnant. And she, it sounds like, goes to her family and says, she's going to marry Gary Jr. or wants to marry Gary Jr. Her brother Joey has said some things online about the fact that he claims he was abused. He claims Elizabeth was also abused, physically abused. We don't have any hard confirmation of that other than what he's said online. But obviously, somebody was okay. Her parents, it appears, were okay with her marrying Gary Jr. at age 15. And so they went over to West Virginia and they got married. We don't know what else was going on with Elizabeth at that time. One of the Siders family members had granted an interview and said that Elizabeth had a rough home life, and that was his understanding of what happened.
I really can't get past this. The things that I think about are 16 kids, the 12 by 12 room, being compared to feral animals. And additionally, the fact that this woman was pregnant for like 16 straight years, starting when she was around age 15. I can't get past that. Thinking about myself at age 15, I really struggle with it. And I do have questions. I know some people online are speculating about this. We've even talked about it in our past interviews, if whether Elizabeth is the 17th victim, if she was quote unquote indoctrinated into some sort of situation. And I know you've been trying to get a hold of her attorney, Tommy Stolley, about, to have an interview and sit down, and that's going to happen. I'm saying it now. I'm sure you're going to talk to her. So you're going to track her down.
See.
If anyone is, it's you.
Yeah.
But what are our thoughts overall, or what have we heard about the possibility that maybe she is a victim here too?
We really don't know. I mean, we have that post from her brother saying that she was indoctrinated. She followed this family. But we don't have any other evidence of that. I think we need more information from Elizabeth. We need more information from maybe Siders family members, whether that's, Gary Jr.'s siblings or people who are related to Christina, who goes by Lynn, and Gary Sr., people who are around this family dynamic. What were they observing? What does Gary Jr. have to say, if anything? We don't know if he's even spoken to law enforcement, when they first went there. We don't know. But what we do know is that this is not normal. This is not normal. And 15-year-old kids, even if they're pregnant, sorry, I'm just going to say it. You're still a kid. You are a kid. You're a child. And so it raises a lot of questions. When she went to the hospital, were any questions to deliver this baby at age 15? Were any questions asked about, oh my God, how did you get pregnant? That type of thing. Now, by that time, she would have been married. So maybe she's like, hey, I'm an emancipated minor, technically, and I'm married, so it's okay. Who knows? Who knows? But it does beg the question of, were questions asked at the hospital? If you go to the hospital and hospital staff, they're mandatory reporters.
Mandated reporters, yep.
So, and hospitals often employ social workers who get involved when they suspect something might be amiss or awry. And so I'm wondering to myself, did that happen? Did social workers at the hospital come and say, do you guys need some help? You seem to be having a lot of babies. Back to back to back. You're a very young woman, and I think you can do that without, being too intrusive. So there's a lot we don't know, Sierra. There's a lot we don't know. What was Elizabeth Russell, a headstrong 15-year-old kid who's pregnant, and she said, "I'm taking off, and that's it, Mom and Dad," or was there something more going on? Those are still the answers we need. But I'm just letting you know, if I had been 15 years old and went to my mom and said, I'm pregnant and I'm getting married, she would have said, get up to your room. I mean, I wouldn't have been leaving the house. No way.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up so many good points in all of this. Were these questions asked when she herself, Elizabeth, was a minor? Then if she's a repeat visitor, so to speak, if the children continually are born year after year at the hospital, was anyone asking any questions? And I know you have to go and dig even deeper into this case, so I'm not going to take up too much more of your time. I'll just ask you this. I know that there's been talk of a grand jury convening. However, these proceedings are secret. Is there anything we know about a timetable or what's ahead?
Well, the prosecutor, Bill Archer, had said in a press conference last week before the gag order, that, you know, they do grand jury like once every month and a half or something like that out there. They don't have grand jury very often. I mean, this is a small county. They have an $8 million operating budget. They don't have a lot of crime. I mean, they may have crime, of course, but you know, I don't know if they have a lot of heinous crimes or felony crime where they have to have grand jury. Like where I live, they have grand jury every day.
Yeah.
In Franklin County in Columbus, in Cuyahoga County in Cleveland, they have grand jury every day. It's not like this out there. So they would have to convene likely a special grand jury for this, summon some people to the courthouse, and then present their evidence. But the investigation also is still ongoing. They talked about downloading devices and things of that nature for this investigation. And a lot of that takes time, even when you have analysts at BCI who can comb through all of that data. So he had made it sound like in a couple of weeks he may have some news on that, but mentioned that the proceedings are secret. So the timeline for when exactly that grand jury will take place is still unclear.
TBD, and, you know, maybe more charges coming down the pipeline, maybe more information hopefully coming out despite this gag order. I don't know. There's still so many questions in this case, still so much interest. And Anjanette Levy, thank you so much for coming on Scandal 2 weeks in a row. It's been great to pick your brain. Thank you for coming back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll see what else I can dig up. I'm working on it.
From here, as we talked about during the interview with Anjanette, we are still waiting on that grand jury to be convened. It's unclear when that's going to happen because, again, those proceedings are secret, but we can expect something coming down the pipeline. In the meantime, that's where today's episode of Scandal leaves us for now. If you like what you saw and you want to see more or connect with me on social media, you can find me on places like Instagram at Sierra Gillespe. Thanks for watching today's episode of Scandal. As always, I'm your host, Sierra Gillespe, and I'll see you next time.